And we'll call the meeting to order at 6:33. Welcome to everyone who's here. And hopefully we'll be winding down. I don't think that we're going to be anytime soon, but hopefully we'll be able to wind down these Zoom meetings sometime soon. There's no real indication that we're going to, but
you got to hope.
Always hope.
Yeah.
Okay. First item on the agenda is to approve the minutes from the regular meeting held on May 26, 2020.
I make a motion, we approve the minutes from the regular meeting, May 26, 2020.
I'll second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. The next item on the agenda, I'm going to try to bring up some notes I made in the last time we did this. As we've done in the past 5 or 6 years, the Neighborhood Assistance Act tax credit is available for Deep River benefits and nonprofits and things like that. The last 2 years, Allison Karam from the Deep River Congregational Church and Joanne Horgan, and I think for the last 3 years from Kirtland Commons, have requested town approval of the tax credit program. As I've said every year that I've been First Selectman, there is no real work from the town other than organizing and submitting a couple of documents and signing a couple of documents. Both of these projects are going to be for, I believe, for energy efficiency or for repair work to a part of the building that needs repair. I know they've been really upgrading at the Congregational Church, especially last year. I think they worked down in the community room, made some big changes on the windows there. There's really the only thing that we need to do is vote to move these to a town meeting, and I'd suggest that we schedule a town meeting for immediately following our next Board of Selectmen's meeting. So if you guys have any questions, usually they come in and speak a little bit, but given the nature of these meetings, I think they'll just come to the town meeting and just explain what they're doing.
I think some people have asked, why the Deep River Congregational Church, and I think that at least in the short amount of time that I've been on, I've done one, is that, there's a lot of community activities that are done at the church.
Oh yeah. They've got,
it's just
all kinds of different things go on.
It's a meeting.
It's open for anybody, really, isn't it, Angus?
Yes, it is. It's not
whoever comes and
whoever applies, any not-for-profits or or businesses. They're not. What it is in a nutshell, it's large corporations like EverSource make
for tax credits,
contributions towards tax credits,
right?
And these folks that gets divvied out to these different organizations that make these applications. It's worked out well for Kirtland Commons over the years, and it must be working well for the Congregational Church because this is their 3rd year back. So we can get a motion to move that forward, and we'll schedule a meeting for after our next meeting, which is I think the 23rd.
I'll make a motion to move the Neighborhood Assistance Act tax credit for the Deep River Congregational Church and Kirtland Commons, move it to a town meeting after our next regular scheduled selectmen's meeting.
Great.
Second that.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. That's it for our agenda. We do have a guest here tonight. Tony Bolduc is the chairman, maybe the reluctant chairman of the Planning and Zoning Commission. I've got some things to say about it, but Tony's here. He can maybe explain to us what happened last night, and I'll make my comments following him.
So I was going to say, so last night there was a special meeting to discuss CHA, the old CME, to appoint them as the CEO. And in doing so, the commission voted to remove the river cog immediately and put forward CHA to the Board of Selectmen. In doing so, they left us without a zoning enforcement officer. So I have a call into the attorney to see if I can sign off on permits. He's looking into it. But again, we're kind of in the weeds at the moment, as far as I can see it. I've discussed it with Angus and he thinks about the same, so.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I do think that that you do have some authority. Not certain if simply by virtue of being the chair you have that authority, or if you needed to be appointed.
Yeah, that's Dave Tykes is looking into that. So he thinks that just to keep everything in good graces, probably just do that. So maybe have another special meeting if need be.
Yeah, that's probably smart. You know, we're not able to meet with CHA until Friday to interview. So,
so yeah, I mean that's where I'm at. If anybody has any questions,
Well, I was going to
see if I
ask
can
you,
answer them.
I think I've heard, some of it in the past, over the last year or so that I've been on. Tell me and tell us the reasoning for this organization versus, trying to find and hire a qualified individual. And, what's the advantages, or what was the reason, the voting and whatnot, to educate me and others that might be here.
I can't be 100%. I can't read minds, but my guess is that because they had applied before, and we didn't use them, they were there and available again instantaneously. And my guess is that they didn't like an application. The commission didn't like an application that came forward the way it was handled. So this was kind of a gut reaction. So that's my feeling on this.
I've heard some people say that, the organization has a lot of experts that they can draw on versus, just a single Julie or Kathy. And
Right.
that is an advantage in people's minds. I know it appears that they're more expensive per hour than an individual is by quite a bit of money, from what I don't have the details, but that's what I've heard.
Yeah, they're more money, but again, they have more people, and it's an organization versus one person.
Yep.
They are in Essex doing planning, I think, and that's it.
Well, that's
they're
what
they're the town planners in Essex. Essex has their own zoning enforcement officer. It's full-time role.
I was going to ask if they are being used by other small towns that, instead of an individual, are there other Deep River sized towns that are using this group versus the individual route? If that was discussed in the discussion.
The two small towns that I do know of are, Essex is close by, but the two small towns are, is Wilton, which good luck finding that on a map, and Basra is another one. The only reason I know that is because my boss lives there. So those are the two that are around the same population that we have. So those are the two smaller towns that use them.
Yeah.
What was the first one? What was the first one, Tony?
Wilton.
Wilton?
See? Yeah, Wilton.
I know where it is. I covered that area, so I know it very
that's
well.
down in your area, yeah.
Weston, Wilton, Ridgefield, all the rich people.
I was able to speak with the first selectman in Basra, and they had I don't want to say a similar situation, but they had a retired zoning enforcement officer, and they were not able to find someone, so they hired these folks. They're working 3 hours a week for them. I think with our, with the budget that we have in place right now, which is 30,000 and change, we would land at their hourly rate of $120 an hour. We will land at about 5 hours a week of coverage, and that's really one of my biggest problems with this. Is that cuts our office hours in half, and also eliminates any staff support at any meetings. And given the nature of this particular planning and zoning commission, I do not think that that's advisable. We've got a very impetuous population on the board. Not all the board, but some of the board is very impetuous and don't quite grasp what the role of the Planning and Zoning Commission is, as opposed to the role of the zoning enforcement officer. And I don't know how it's going to work out. I'm not in favor of cutting the hours of the office. We have had in the past an active town, and Kathy was busy all the time. Julie, I don't know. I wasn't as close with Julie professionally. She was new. She didn't work with me except for when someone came in and asked for a meeting with both of us. So I don't know how busy she was, but she was not there all that often. She was late every day. So
Yeah.
My question would be, do we have to sign, if we sign on right now until the end of the fiscal year?
Yep.
Which sounds like that's what we're talking about.
3 weeks away for that. Yep.
Okay, and then can we go month by month? Can we go 6 months, or once you sign on, you sign on for the whole year?
I was going to ask the same thing. Yeah.
There are this is an interesting situation because the Planning and Zoning Commission understands very clearly, and some of the members on the Planning and Zoning Commission insist that they have the sole authority to hire. They do not. They have the authority to appoint. We can't, I can't just go out and hire a zoning enforcement officer and have that person have any authority any more. That they can go along and appoint someone, and that person is welcome to work for free, but there is no salary. They have not been hired, and that's why we're going to try and have an interview on Friday. Tony and I will be meeting with them on Friday to interview and see how we're going to move forward and how we might move forward.
I just want to be. I'm sorry.
No, you are 100% correct. We are going to. I don't think that we have any choice, given the situation that we have right now, to keep them on, take them on for the duration of this fiscal year. Frankly, I don't think we have much choice to take them on for a few months beyond that. But I do think I could speechify like crazy about this one. This was totally contrary to 1 year ago, when the same Planning and Zoning Commission insisted that we interview many people, that we advertise for weeks, and this was done without any consultation with me, other than notifying me that we were having a special meeting. It's just, I don't get it. But $120 an hour is going to be expensive for the town, and we need to, as a town, determine that we want to take that on, with the understanding that we're going to be restricting the hours of the office.
Well, I want to be fiscally responsible for our citizens that elected us first.
Yeah,
first
me
and
too.
Foremost.
Yeah.
Secondly, I also want to have an enforcement officer there. My concern is, if you're saying that they're going to cut the hours to 5 hours a week, does that mean just 5 hours in the office a week, or is that 5 hours total? So if the person comes to the office for 2 hours and then goes and does site visits for 3 hours, is that your 5 hours, or is it strictly 5 hours in the office? And then if you guys have a meeting tomorrow night and you need that person, is that extra? Is that an extra charge? Those are the questions that I'm concerned about.
Yep.
Telephone calls that are made, to consult the different people in the office and things like that. How is that billed? Things like that. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, those are good concerns.
Yeah.
Those are legitimate concerns.
But
10 hours a week.
But I don't want to go too long without, an enforcement officer.
Yeah,
so,
we need one. Right.
We're not going to go without one.
Right.
We can't go without one. The activity that's going to take place, obviously my hope, but also in my estimation of what's happening already in the Connecticut River Valley area, with houses selling. Most of those houses are probably going to end up being remodeled. There's going to be some development happening in the area. But those are things we're going to have to talk about. That's what Tony and I are going to be speaking with them about. What is their flexibility? If there's a meeting on the third Thursday, do they only come in for 2 hours on that Monday so they can prepare for the meeting and attend the meeting?
Is there going to be a designated person that deals
Are we going,
with, things like that?
I'll leave it to you, not to you, but I'll leave it to the Board of Finance as to whether or not we increase the salary for that role, and bump it up to 40,000. I don't know.
Maybe in the interim, you see how they perform. Give them, I hate to say it, but give them the benefit of the doubt. And if it turns out that everybody's pleased and minds
Oh yeah,
are
no,
changed and all that kind of
don't
stuff.
misunderstand any of
Yeah.
what I'm saying. They're a professional
Oh, absolutely.
organization. They're very good at what they do.
But we as a town
they're-
have never dealt
they're
with
planners.
multiple individuals. It's always been it's been one person that people got to know per se, and and somebody.
No,
Every
they're
time
not gonna.
the
I'm
office
sorry.
is open, there could be somebody else there. And who's this guy? I talked to Bob last time, and now Sue's
No,
there or something.
That's not what they're going to do. They're
Yeah,
going
they got
to assign a person to our
Yep.
town, and he will come here.
Okay.
Whatever the hours are determined.
Okay.
I was gonna-
That goes back to my initial question. We finish up the fiscal year of this year, and we start again in July. Do we have to sign a year contract?
Yeah.
Can we sign a
Well,
3-month
see.
contract, 6-month contract? Because what happens if we find a diamond in the rough? All of a sudden, someone comes up and is very qualified and wants to work part-time, and we can get more hours for less money. Again, I don't want to be pigeonholed in where we're locked in. If we have to, okay, but if we don't, I would like to have our options at least.
Absolutely.
Well, that will be part of this. I will listen. Just given the nature of the situation in this community right now, while this is in fact my job, I will include you both in all of these decisions because of the nature of the political atmosphere in Deep River, being driven by a small but very vocal group of people. You will all be involved in this decision.
Yeah, it's that, and we as a town have always had an individual, not a group.
I don't think that's a concern. It's not a concern for me. We are going to get either John or Mike.
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
assuming it's going to be Mike, and because I'm guessing John's going to be a lot more expensive, but we'll work those details will be worked out more than likely Friday. I can say that I know that they worked over in Clinton on a consulting basis to help their zoning enforcement officer train, and that seemed to work out fine, and they ended. I don't know. I'll speak with their town manager and see if that was under contract or if that was a month-to-month, or on an as-needed basis. Those are things. This happened last night, so it's been a busy day.
And again, sitting in the seat that I sit in or Jimmy sits in, that we aren't on a day-to-day basis in a town hall, not knowing what the zoning enforcement does for 5 hours, 10 hours, whatever Kathy did or Julie did, makes it hard for us, or at least hard for myself, to make an educated decision.
Absolutely.
Again, I'm trying to have an educated decision, but I'm also got that money in the back of my head that we fought so hard this year, our town budget. That's my concern there. But if we can get a good bang for our buck, I support it. But again, I'm concerned about money.
Yep.
That's my.
Yep.
But I'm not, like I said, I'm not dealing with it like Tony or you deal with it because you're the chairman, or Angus, you're dealing with it because you're in the office every day. I'm looking at it from 10,000 feet away, so it makes it hard.
Absolutely.
The only thing I was going to mention is, trying to put a positive spin on the whole situation is maybe, since they are a multi-town, company, maybe they can get this stuff done faster because there are more people involved. So maybe that helps. Maybe, the cutback, because I know it's at 7 hours a week right now, and we're going to 5. Is that? I think those
No,
are
it's 8 hours in the office a week.
Okay, 8 hours down to 5. So
Yeah.
we're losing some time, but maybe they can get the stuff done faster. That's my hope.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
Kathy was working every minute and,
Right.
and additional time without getting paid for it. So,
But you keep saying in the office. Is that at the town hall in the office, or is that?
Remote.
the time they're going to get paid for is either going to be in the office or in town reviewing sites and that kind of.
Okay.
I would assume, who knows? They might try to do some remote work and try to charge us for it, but I don't know.
Okay.
We'll discuss that. I want that office open Monday and Wednesday
And
from
that's an
8,
important part. Yeah.
8 to 12:30.
Yep.
That's just what I want. But that's not. It's not going to happen at $120 an hour. Not with this budget, you know. So we'll go from that. I will say that I've, regardless of the feeling of the Planning and Zoning Commission, I sent a letter of gratitude to the Rivercog and to Torrance. I will tell you personally that the professional attitude and performance that Torrance put in both the first time and this time were commendable. I don't understand why an organization like Rivercog, which has filled in towns like Old Lyme, in Westbrook, in Portland, and many other towns in our region, and always been welcomed and worked well in every single town.
Yeah.
Our Planning and Zoning Commission does not believe that they are professional or that they work with them. I don't know. And I don't say all of our Planning and Zoning Commission, but I say a majority, because that's where we landed last night. I think it was, as I said, I think it was impetuous. I think it was an unprofessional decision, but it was a decision that was made, and that's where we're at. So I sent that letter to them, thanking them for their time, for their effort. We have yet to receive a bill from them. So
that was going to be my question. What were we paying those? Were we paying them by the hour, or how were we paying them, Angus?
Thus far, all of their time that was spent came out of our dues, so we didn't pay them anything yet.
Okay. Okay.
But you know, I could speechify all day long about this. I was,
Yeah.
And I don't want to go too far into it.
No.
There seems to be a preference for chaos over order and process, all the while claiming that order and process is what we're looking for, but that doesn't seem to be the case. I mean, I emailed, just for an example, I sent this last particular instance in Deep River. I forwarded so Tony and I can have a conversation with CHA about the last situation that seemed to trigger this past action. I emailed all of those emails to John so he can review them and talk about how he might have handled it and what he thought about it, give his observation on this. And we'll see. But the email back to him says, I think you're going to use up your whole budget just on me reviewing these emails. There were so many. It was a terrible thing to have to watch. And I commend Torrance for his efforts in that particular project. I think he came to the right solution, and I think he did it in a professional and thoughtful manner, as opposed to just jumping to conclusions and making impetuous decisions. But that's where we are. That's that.
Okay.
We'll meet. Tony and I will meet with John on Friday, and then we'll have more information as we move forward. But my hope is that Friday we can come to an understanding that at least the office will be covered for those 5 hours.
And in the meantime, you got to look to see if Tony might be able to fill in that little
Yes,
gap.
well, I know we have applications pending right now that should be able to be handled administratively.
Right, there's about three, yeah.
But
three
we
or
have no
four.
one to do that. You know?
Right. And that's important.
It's very important. We have, we spoke at the last meeting. We had a barbershop that closed a month and a half ago because of COVID. Well, someone else has come in and wants to reopen it. So I think that she's just waiting for a signature. So
Yeah,
let's hope we can get to that.
Yep, that's too bad.
Let's see. You will see a townwide. I don't know, Tony. Do you have anything else you want to talk about?
Well, I don't know if this is the right spot to ask about, because some of the questions that come in are about the food trucks, and I'm curious. I mean, I know planning and zoning have to write regulations and all that stuff for that, but I don't know if you guys have some input you'd like to throw at us. I mean, maybe throw us a letter, or same thing from economic development.
What I could suggest, we certainly will talk. I'll put something together for EDC.
Yeah.
But I will suggest to you that the executive orders might allow for a temporary permit with a food truck through the course of this particular crisis.
That's what I was thinking, yeah. Because there's a few people have asked.
What
Yeah,
is it?
I understand. I think we have one up at the brewery and one at the, and one in
Subway?
front of where the Subway used to be.
Yeah.
So, I think we might be able to do that. But I also think that you might want to put that on your agenda just for a conversation as to whether you want to allow for that.
That's why. Yeah, that's why
as
I think it's going to be on the. I know it's going to be on the agenda. I just wanted to know how you guys felt about it.
So it
I'm
sounds
throwing
like there's two groups or individuals that want to have food trucks in town.
There are.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm of a mixed mind on it. I love food trucks. I think
Yeah.
you can get some great food,
Absolutely.
but I'd much rather have them in a brick and mortar shop. You know?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's something that you guys will have to discuss. If you
Okay.
want my input, I'm happy to provide it.
No, we do. Yeah, that's why I'm asking.
I know you do. I'm not so sure that some of the
Oh.
other members.
I'm going to ask anyway. So
Yeah. So I appreciate that. I will be telling everybody I'm going to send out an email tonight. I've been trying all day to gather information from DEP. There are bears on the loose, or a bear wandering around Deep River and Essex and Ivoryton. I don't know if there's more than one. They have a pretty good range.
Came through out here in Winthrop.
But he was right behind our house yesterday.
Really?
So,
Wow.
no
he was
kidding.
down by the marina. So it could be more than one. I don't know.
Maybe,
Looking for those
maybe
food
they haven't
trucks.
been by my house. I'm wondering if maybe Haynes is
Scaring them away with the dust.
Could be.
Oh, just the dust. Yeah,
Dust
exactly.
scared them away.
I just hope he stays away from my beehives.
Yeah. Shoot.
Let's see. We had Paul. Oh, I will say, I don't know how many folks actually watched this, but we had I know I told you two about that little scare that we had with the firewood around town.
Right.
That has been resolved. It was just a misguided efforts by a person, a mentally disabled fellow who's trying to start a business, and he thought he was going to start it, to send out a message that way. But that case has been settled. The investigation was there. There was never a threat.
Yeah.
Just a scare. So,
The timing couldn't have been any worse for rumors to start.
Exactly.
we did have a really, I thought it came off pretty well for the lack of organization. The rally last Friday in front of the town hall. I'd suggest there were about 150 people there. Maybe there was.
Oh,
a little more,
really?
maybe a little
Oh, wow.
less, yeah.
I didn't go by. Okay.
It was a good turnout. Yeah. But that's what I have. I don't know if you guys have anything, or you want to discuss anything, or Jim, if you have something that's.
I think I mentioned it at one point that the Deep River Farmers Market organization as they're trying to organize, and they have approached the Deep River Historical Society for the use of the grounds.
Yep.
And
they're working with the health district right now as to how they're going to do it.
I don't know at this point whether the Historical Society will or will not allow. I think my gut is that it might be in the negative, but I'm not sure.
Well, there are other spots.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good spot,
Absolutely.
but there are other spots, and I think it'd be nice to have a market back in town.
Yep.
We did for a short period of time. We had one at the Lace Factory 10
At the
years.
Lace Factory.
Yeah,
Years ago.
15 years ago. That was 15 years ago now.
Yep.
So that was and frankly, if they do start up, I imagine that we'll offer them the opportunity to move inside for the winter at the factory, because the wedding stopped in the fall, so they could just move it right inside and have a year.
Yeah, I think it'd be great. I mean, all whether it be a town place or an individual business or whatever, that there's just different conditions that everybody has to be concerned about, with their facilities, and for right now the farmers market is a for-profit type of situation, and the Historical Society is not, and they're struggling financially a little bit right now, and there would be no income to them, and things like this.
Charge them rent.
Every organization, whether it be the Lace Factory or the town or the Historical Society, has their own criteria that they have to feel comfortable with. And then you top it off with COVID and all that stuff that's going on right now. It's just an interesting can of worms wherever it lands. So that's all that I have right now.
I was actually thinking that the Historical Society might make a little money off of that. Just rent the space to them, even if it's $50 a week or something.
Yeah, they're not. I don't think they're looking to make that kind of contribution. I don't know.
Well, farmers are worse than sailors.
I would like to look into something for next year. I'll start talking now. but to have a community garden. And I would
Interesting
like-
that you say that.
I would like to know, again, it's early, but my mind's always spinning and wheels are spinning. The property at the town garage on the left-hand side, the old dump. If you built 15, 20 raised gardens and had a community garden where the community can pick it. The reason I'm asking that is because one of my colleagues just did one up in the town of Prospect in conjunction with the Lions Club. And they built 15 5x20 raised gardens. Again, it's something for community to bring the community together and have a garden, and everybody chips in and come pick a tomato, come pick cucumber, whatever you want. Just again, I'm just thinking outside the box, and I don't know what we would have to go through with the planning and zoning or inland wetlands or whatever, but it's just something that we can start thinking about for next year.
Well, those are really interesting idea. We Carol and the Park and Rec are working with the Garden Club and someone from the River Cog. I can't remember the details on it, on putting a community garden out behind the old football field, behind in Davis Field.
Okay.
Out back, right with right in line with the historical society property.
Gotcha. Okay.
But those will be it'll be a community garden with I can't remember the size of the beds, but they'll be individually rented so that the produce and whatever comes out of them will be enjoyed by whoever rents that space, not food for the community. But I love the idea, and I think up at the dump or at the garage might be good. That's you're going to see some activity up there anyway. We need to put some more soil on top of that. It's kind of settling in and stuff, becoming a pond, and we can't have the ponds with all the mosquito areas around here, so issues around here right now. So, but that's a great idea, and please keep it up and keep the idea moving, and speak with Carol about that, and I'll speak with Carol and any other thoughts that we can have.
Yeah, I'm working closely with my colleague from work and how theirs is all going to shake out and how it works as the season goes. So
great. Well, let us know, because we can certainly try that. Anything else?
I'm good.
All right. Thank you all very much for coming. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Tony, for coming and supplying the information and the conversation.
No problem. I'm gonna see if I can get my mouse to work to get out of this thing.
I make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
All right. Thank you, Jim. I was going to forget that. I was just going to leave. So,
Take everybody out.
Man, you going to second?
Yep, I second it.
Okay, great. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we'll adjourn the meeting at 7:07.
Have a good night, guys.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
We'll see you guys in a half an hour.
See you in a bit.
Yeah, right.
All right.
Okay, bye-bye.
We have the full Board of Finance and the full Board of the Selectmen. Everyone is aware this is a special meeting of the Board of Finance joining with the Board of Selectmen. Since it is a special meeting, we are limited in what we can talk about. Just to get us in the right place, I'm going to have Laurie read the call of the meeting.
Okay. The call of the meeting is to discuss with Superintendent Brian White concerning requests to Deep River to refund its portion, $14,534,044 of R4 surplus, the total of which is $43,065 to R4. There will be an audience of citizens concerning item number 1 and a vote.
Excellent. All right. Here is my, absent anything added to that, here's my suggested agenda that we have Angus begin with, hopefully in the form of a recommendations from the selectmen. He can decide how he wishes to frame it. Then I've asked Jane Kavanaugh to come in next and sort of phrase or give a context of why the regional board wishes us to return these dollars to the regional board, and then we'll have Brian fill in the details. If everyone is comfortable with that, we'll answer questions and have a discussion after Brian, and then we will decide what the Board of Finance wishes to do. hearing, unless anyone wishes to offer an alternative agenda, my first item is Angus to put us in a direction of the Board of Selectmen.
Thanks. And my first action is going to be to call our Board of Selectmen meeting back into order. So we are officially back as a board as our Selectmen's meeting, and that's at 7:36. Yes, you've all, I think Bud sent you an email outlining the details of this request. I've only got a couple of things to say. You all, I think part of that outline was that Essex and Chester have both agreed in principle to this, dependent upon all three towns agreeing to this request. And that's just FYI, that's an important thing to know. They have both boards of finances have agreed, and boards of selectmen have agreed in principle to this request. As a board of selectmen, we have not discussed this as an agenda item because it's not our decision. It is your decision. But I think I will certainly leave the floor open for Jim and Dwayne to speak to this as your audience of citizens proceeds. My own feeling on it is this, and my request to you all is really this. I understand the emotional, almost visceral response to this request from this particular board and from the town of Deep River. We have had we feel pummeled by the Region 4 budgets year after year after year, and it's mostly as a result of ADM, and we have to understand that. But the important part of this for me is that we need to take that emotional part out of this decision. This is a decision that's based on fact, not based on the programs or something that we may or may not agree with. And this is not an increase to our budget. This is not something that's going to cost us more money. This is money that we've already spent, and this is money that may have come back to us as a result of a surplus, but it is not money that we have budgeted for in our, or prepared for in our budget. It's not money that we have expected. It's not money that we've anticipated. It's just the annual surplus returned to us. I will leave to Brian and to the Board of Education to explain how this came about and the reasoning for this, because they can do a better job at that than I can. But having listened to that explanation, I feel pretty strongly that it is wiser for us to allow for this money to be returned based on the fact that it is not something that it's not income that we budgeted. It's money that we have already spent. And I believe that it is wiser for us to allow for this to go back to the board, or back to Region 4 now, than to have to put it into next year's budget, because this deficit in the capital account is going to stay there until we are able to replenish it. I believe that the Board of Education is, and the towns are obligated to replenish that account, and it's going to come out of us. We're going to pay it one way or the other. I do believe that it is better to spend money that we did not anticipate than it is to have to budget it later. And if it's pay me now or pay me later is basically the easy way to say that. I may not have said it very eloquently, but that's my position on this. Is that I think that I recommend that you all take the step to allocate this money and agree to send this back to Region 4. And with that, I'll leave it to you, Bud.
Thank you. Not as a surprise to anyone that Angus, Brian, and I have had a conversation on this request, which formed much of what I sent to you in my brief summary email. But Brian sent to me the minutes of the regional board meeting where the regional board, I believe I'm doing this right, requested that Brian approach the towns and request the $40-some thousand be returned to the board. With that, and I didn't set that up as clean as I would like. But anyhow, before I turn it, ask Brian to get into detail. Jane, could you put us into a context? And I've asked Jane because she is the senior member of our delegation. And I use the word senior in the old-fashioned way, a person of high authority. I'd ask Jane to sort of give us the context of why the board, the regional board, think that we should return these dollars to you.
Being here. Basically, as you know, we've had a deficit. It was identified last year from the budget. We really didn't know if this was a paper deficit or not a paper deficit. And there's been much work this year to find out what this deficit was. And we finally came up with a number. We then found out what our surplus was for the end of the year. And we were told that we could only do the percentage, I think, and Brian, you can correct me because I think you're more astute to these actual numbers, that we could only put in the portion of the money that we actually spent. So it came to like $152,000, I think, and there was $45,000 left. And there was a push because we had this deficit to just try to put it all there, but we were advised by our auditor not to do that. And so what we asked to do was then to go back to the towns, give it to the towns and ask the towns to give it back to us to fund this deficit. And I did actually write something up for a little bit later about why I think you should do this, but that's kind of the reason for that request. And I think Brian can probably explain it even better than that. But do you want me to give me my little speech here?
Well, I'm going to let you decide when you think your final speech should be delivered.
Well, basically, what I want to say is I am the senior member of the Region 4 board. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing,
It's
but
a good thing.
I've been around for a while, and there have been, our financial house has been difficult at times. And I think there's been some surprises and some things we didn't anticipate, and sometimes we didn't get all the information. And so I definitely want to say that I hear and understand the Board of Finance. I've talked to many of you and understand kind of the emotion about Region 4. And I understand where you're coming from and why you're frustrated. But I guess what I want to stress is things have really changed this past year. And during the past year, under Brian's leadership, and I think with a very full commitment of the R4 board, there's been a ton of work done to really unpack and the current financial status and issues of Region 4, including this deficit that was first identified a year ago. The process has been open for the most part. I mean, not for the most part, for the first time, really, it's been very transparent. And we've actually included, I think, Board of Selectmen have been included, Board of Finance members and some of the different task force to really try to understand our capital sinking fund, which we learned had never been appropriately even established, although we thought it had been, insurance issues, et cetera. And this budget process this year, I can say is the first time since I've been on the board that we really had a zero-based budget and it was data-driven. And all the questions board members really had were entertained, thoroughly researched, and we got data. So I feel confident that this year we now have a real sense of what our financial issues are, or what our budget is, and we have real numbers going forward. And all our budget numbers now, I think, really reflect the true cost of programming. They're in the right place. And now that we have this baseline, I think we'll be able to examine and determine to the budget priorities going forward. And as a board member, I'm really committed to a transparent budget process, continued dialogue with town officials and all our community stakeholders to develop budget requests that support an outstanding and fiscally responsible education in our region. And I can say from the time I've been on the board, this has been the first year that I've heard our superintendent talk about being fiscally responsible. And I think that's what we really need to be. And as you know, part of Deep River's issues have been ADM, and that's just the way it is. And until we can kind of figure a better way to maybe figure out how we split or work on that, that's going to be always an issue. So I guess it's my hope that the Deep River Board of Finance will join Chester and Essex in support returning the surplus money back to Region 4. For me, such a vote in the affirmative would be your acknowledgement and support of the hard work the administration and our board has done this year to get our financial house in order and our continued commitment to going forward. So that's my little piece, and I really hope you'll kind of do this because we are working hard, we are committed, and it's just very the whole different kind of culture, I think, at Region 4. So
Thank you.
Was that okay?
We did an excellent job of making it very nice. With that in mind, I'm going to have Brian come in with the details. Brian, would you clarify what you are actually asking? Are you planning on giving the surplus back to us and asking us then to give it back to you? Or are you asking just to keep the surplus?
So technically, we're returning the surplus. The board had made that motion and voted on it. That's per policy. And so there had been a lot of discussion with the Region 4 board once we understood the true amount of unexpended dollars at the end of fiscal year 18-19. As was discussed, the actual amount that the board voted on was $158,215. We were able to apply those unexpended funds to the deficit in our capital fund. The $43,065 in question was not part of the original appropriation that came into the district by way of unexpected revenue. And so in making their decisions about how many of the unexpended dollars we could apply towards the deficit, the $43,065 by policy had to be returned to the towns by way of ADM. And so after consulting with our auditor and our attorney, the only way we could potentially apply that $43,065 toward the deficit would be by policy to return it to the towns, which we voted to do, and then essentially request of the towns that they return that money back to us so that we may apply it to the deficit. Many of our board members initially had questions about why not just put the entire $201,000 in unexpended dollars from 18-19 towards the deficit. And that's the reason why not all of those dollars were eligible for the board to do that. And so that's really the basis for our request this evening. And I thank you for your consideration.
So Angus, and this is probably too technical, that means we have to record in this budget year the $14,000, and we have to authorize that it be spent and increase our budgeted amount for education?
It is. I'm not sure where we would put it. I assume it would go into the education pile, but it will be an appropriation, but it will be very similar, Bud, to what we've been doing with the other, or in my opinion anyway, very similar to what we've been doing in the recent years. Whenever we have revenue that is directly related to an expense. This money, let's pretend that this is a grant, an education grant for $14,000. We would have put a revenue line in, and we would have put an expense line in that equaled each other, so our budget is flat.
Correct.
But
we would have to go to this dollar amount. We're going to have one of our symbolic town meetings, right?
We will have a town meeting. This is an appropriation of town funds, as Brian explained. And I will tell you that this policy, I don't believe, I may be off on this, and I'll welcome a correction, but I believe that this policy may not have been in place, but the law has been in place for many years that the region is entitled to hold on to a certain amount of their surplus, and the policy is to return the remainder. And this is the first time in my experience in the last 8 years or 10 years that I've heard that policy is actually being followed. So I'm encouraged by that. But yes, we will need to appropriate this money. It will come into our budget as it normally does. And we actually never logged that as anything. It's just revenue. We don't put a line in, but we will need to make an appropriation for this money to go back. And that will come back to the budget making authority, which is what I said earlier. This is your decision. The Board of Selectmen will authorize you to make that decision, but it is your decision to make.
And that will come into, while we're at the end of June. Brian, when are you planning on setting this money back? If it works, when is this money coming back?
That's actually a good question. Dick Hewitt's on the line, our interim business manager. Dick, do you want to speak to the mechanics and the timing of how that occurs? The board has voted to do so. So now it's just a matter of when that money goes from Region 4 back to the town of Deep River. Could you please speak to that in a little bit more detail?
Well, I think that those checks can be cut and distributed before the end of the week, if that's the way people want to have it work. I haven't been involved in something like this in the past, but it's writing a check for this amount of money is certainly straightforward, and we can certainly deliver it to the respective town halls and then wait for their decisions.
Because we're in late June, I'm curious whether it goes into the current budget or into next year's budget. I'm also concerned that increasing an allocation, a budgetary number to schools, I know, somebody help me out on this thing. That number gets frozen in time, and we have been visited by the state in saying that we cannot decrease that number. I'm a little concerned about increasing any allocation to the education, but that's a concern. I still leave it.
That's a good point, Bud. And it's been a concern of mine for 8 years as budgets grow. But remember, and I don't know, Dick could probably give us a better explanation than this, but in my way of thinking, this is not an additional expenditure. It is money that we have already given to the school. And I think if we can do this in this fiscal year, if you guys can make this decision tonight, we can authorize you to make the decision. You guys can make the decision tonight, and we can do this in this fiscal year. So there will be no increase to our.
That's what I was asking. It seems to me we've already gone over the current years with the next year's budget. So it is, I think, rather a moot point, if I've said that correctly. Cool. All right. So Brian, if whatever money, even the 158 and potentially a 43 additional, the capital fund, that money goes to the capital fund, who borrowed it due to weakness in accounting or bad decisions, whatever choice. It goes into your general fund, correct?
I believe that the dollars returned by the town should be considered capital and outside of the normal appropriation process. And I don't believe that it would impact the minimum budget requirement. But I think would have to be a legal decision.
If we do it in this budget year, I think it becomes a moot point, as I said before. But my question is, if we give you the dollars, even though 158, the capital fund pays it to your general fund. The general fund now has all this excess cash, does it not?
Well, how this transpired originally, based on what my discussions with the auditor, is the fact that the capital projects were paid for out of Region 4 funds. And then they lost track of it and never reimbursed the Region 4 from the capital account, so they had extra money, which in fact, when you do the accounting, is really a deficit. And this built up from 17-18 from 199,000 to 18-19 to 429,000. So.
Well, let me just catch up. The deficit is in the capital fund.
That's correct.
You borrowed it from the general fund. Correct?
That's correct.
Did you find that you had a deficit in your general fund during that same period?
I have noticed since coming to the region in December that I have certainly had some cash flow problems in Region 4, and I think this contributed to it.
One of the things, Bud, in terms of kind of addressing some of the almost the cyclical patterns that contributed to this deficit over time, and Dick's alluding to some of it, decisions were being made that required spending. The board was led to believe they were spending dollars out of the capital fund when in fact monies were coming out of the general fund, and then the accounting wasn't following in a way that over time created this situation. On the evening that the Region 4 board met a few weeks ago in May and decided to apply the $158,215 towards the deficit, and also decided to return the $43,065 to the towns, they did make another motion, and they voted to effectively close out what was formerly known as the non-lapsing account, the capital sinking fund. I mean, over time had been referred to by various names, but was essentially the old capital fund, if you will. And some of the work that we've engaged in this year, and some of you on this call were a part of that work, either directly or indirectly through the task force, was to create a new statute-bearing capital fund. And so that is something that the board has adopted into its policies by way of a vote. Obviously, our efforts to eliminate this deficit is a big part of our stepping forward and moving ahead. These dollars, to your point, Bud, would be applied specifically to that deficit. We would not accept those dollars and they wouldn't just float into a larger general fund of sorts. Those dollars, if approved by the board, coupled with the share from both Chester and Essex, all of those dollars, the full $43,065, would be applied specifically to the remaining deficit in our capital account.
And I follow that, but you're paying it to yourself, aren't you? I mean, for instance, my children owe me money. If they ever pay me back, it's all in the same family. Isn't it in the same family? Don't you end up with it all up at the region?
I believe our funds are accounted for separately.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They're different funds. That's why you have the problem.
Well, but you can't really commingle them. If you take from your left pocket and put it in your right pocket, and you don't pay back the left pocket, you're in trouble.
Well, let me push back on you. You did. Now you've got an accountant says that the capital fund owes the general fund money. So we give you money, capital fund pays the general fund back. It's in the general fund. You've got more cash in your general fund, right?
But it was there in the
nobody
beginning.
You're going to pay. These dollars are going to sit in your general fund.
But it's a reimbursement for money that the capital fund used.
Okay, so now the capital fund will have all this cash. There's nobody that you don't have to write checks out of the general fund, or there's nobody who hasn't been paid.
It's a balancing of the accounts.
It's a balance. The accountants are balancing cash, but you're going to have all this cash in your general fund that we give you back.
But it's balancing a negative.
Fine.
And that has been recommended by our auditors that should be balanced correctly.
And they should recommend that. That is good. Here's my cycle. Why can't you simply forgive that? You owe it to yourself. Why can't you forgive yourself? Because your auditor said you can't. It was in the paper. It's a trick question. Okay. What have you folks done to try to solve your problem? Why have you come to us first?
I'm not sure I understand the question, but
You've got property you bought. Can you sell the property? Have you cut some of your own programs to be able to solve this? Good.
So in terms of our budgetary efforts this year with Region 4, we have made some significant reductions. We made some significant staffing reductions. As Jane indicated in her earlier comments, we really did approach this as a zero-based budget. There were some areas of increase this year that were corrections, trying to address past issues, this being one of them. And so as we've talked about throughout the budgetary process this year in our workshops and some of the remarks that I've made to some of the boards in Deep River and other communities this year, some of the more significant drivers in our budgeting process were really to address some of the financial issues that we inherited. There were no new spending initiatives in this year's budget. Our budget number in R4, and I say this in full recognition of the fact that Deep River was hit with an ADM swing this year. But our overall budgetary increase was lower than the cost of our projected salary and benefits increases. So I think we made some more significant reductions this year than at any time in recent history. And coming in as a new superintendent, it was very important for me to do that in a manner that was not going to destabilize the system. We've also made some longstanding commitments to continue to look very carefully at staffing and enrollment levels over time, staffing being our most significant cost driver in the budget. And there are other programmatic areas that we're going to be discussing in more depth moving forward. And so I think we've made some really excellent gains this year in terms of addressing some of the problems that were there. I think we were managed to do that pretty effectively. I think we still have some work to do. The fact that we have a true handle on the scope of this deficit, we're in a much better place than we were less than a year ago. And so we've taken great steps to educate our board, to educate industry towns about the financial status of the region. And with all that information out there, I think we've committed to working collaboratively with all the boards in each of these towns to make sure that moving forward, things are done correctly. The fact of the matter is, after consulting with our auditor, after consulting with our attorney, because we did go back and forth quite a bit this year as to whether or not we had that option of quote unquote forgiving ourselves. And unfortunately, the answer to that is no. In some of our earlier conversations this fall, that was certainly something that myself and other board members had a lot of questions about as we sought to understand the true nature of this deficit. And some of the answer lies in the fact that as a regional system, you could essentially carry that deficit from year to year in a way that the Essex school could not in the local education budget. Some of the state statute that applies to regional finances do make R4 a little bit different in terms of how it operates. And so that's why it was possible for that deficit to roll forward from year to year without folks understanding the true scope of it. And it is something that over time increased for all the reasons we've talked about. So the good news is we've really taken some efforts to reduce that this year. I'm confident that in the near future, we should be able to hopefully eliminate it altogether and truly have the clean slate the region needs to be able to move forward confidently with its finances. So I hope that speaks to some of our efforts. I mean, I'm not going to go on at length about our task force, the joint efforts of all of the boards and looking at how to best proceed relative to the finances of the region. I mean, Bud, you've been a part of those discussions, as have others on the call. And so I know that these boards are well aware of our efforts to engage all the communities in this work this year.
And do not take my question. You are universally appreciated, and the work you're doing is applauded behind your back. You're doing a fine job. That is not my question. I guess my question is, what harm? Who would be harmed if this deficit is not solved, or this 43,000 doesn't go back to you this year? Who would be harmed by that?
Well, it would continue to be cited as a material weakness in our annual audit. For starters, we are submitting to the Office of Policy and Management and Action Plan, committing to the steps that we're going to take to remediate the areas of material weakness. There were similar areas of weakness cited in the 17-18 audit. And so in our work to address those areas, reducing the deficit, for all the reasons we know that it's not good to have a deficit, is an important part of that work. But Dick, I'll invite you to jump in if you have anything to add there.
I suppose it's difficult to understand, but let's assume that these two entities is myself and my brother-in-law, and my brother-in-law borrowed $400 and some odd thousand to do a project and promised to pay me back. That shorts me and my family by that $450,000, and until it's paid back, I'm short. And essentially, this is what's going on here. We had trouble with cash flow. While it didn't break the bank, it makes it awkward to manage when you're short, $400,000. And that's why it should be paid back. And it
And
balances.
I appreciate that you started off grabbing the same one. My children owe me money, but I can forgive their dollars. You can forgive your brother. I'm just asking, have you, the surplus, the deficit in the general fund, what damage has that done? Who would be harmed if, what if we said to you, come back next year and share with us what you have done to address your deficit? And if we think it is a good job, we will join with you. What is the harm of that approach? Why do you come to us first? Why shouldn't we be annoyed that you've taken that 158 and used it? That should come back to us as well.
Well, and I know I'm an outsider here, but Region 4 is really yours. It belongs to you, the towns. We're here to manage it, and we're trying to manage it the best possible way.
Okay.
And balancing the accounts is and showing an audit trail that is positive and something that the community can look forward to and trust. And that's an important piece of information.
And there's no doubt that you're doing a fine job. That is not in question here. You're asking us, we shared doing lots of things too, and our money is short. So I don't know. I will turn it over to the Board of Finance. Do you have any questions, Board of Finance, that you still wish to collect information before we take decide where we wish to go with this? Anyone else have any questions?
I just want to continue, Bud, with where you're going. Can this be, you've put in 158 this year, put in some more next year. That 14,000, quite frankly, some of us were looking for paying for a police officer, possibly going for other major expenditures that the town has not put forward because of the excess in ADM costs. Sell the property. That'll help. Now, I know there's a whole nother legal issue of how to sell it, how to refund it. That'll be a nightmare in and of itself. But with that capital fund, what are you planning on doing with that capital fund?
So in terms of the plan for the capital fund, now that we have a very clear statute-bearing account, we spent a lot of time in this year's budgeting process engaging our board in discussions about the capital needs of the system. And so really what you now have is an account that's functioning as it's intended to. It's looked at as apart from the general fund, and we are developing a capital plan that's tied to how those dollars are planned for and spent over time. And so in this year's budget, we have a number of capital expenditures that were known to the board, projects, property improvements, safety issues, things that our buildings require, where the dollars that we budgeted for were budgeted for with full knowledge of those needs and the individual estimated cost of each of those needs. And so, for instance, we have capital dollars that are in next year's budget that are going towards the repair of some deteriorating curbs and sidewalks that are a safety hazard out in front of two of our buildings and have been for a period of time. We have dollars for a list of other projects, all of which the board acknowledged and approved of during our budgeting process. And so to the question about how those dollars are being spent, perhaps for the first time, we have a very clear spending plan with identified building priorities that are tied to the budgeting process, and the board is approving those projects. So there's full knowledge on the part of the board about how those dollars are being spent and for what purpose and when. So I think those two changes, both on the budgeting side, but also in terms of our practice as a board and administrative team, is going to ensure that moving forward, we're not going to see a lot of the same factors that historically have contributed to the deficit that we're addressing. Dick, is there any other specifics you want to add there about any of our capital expenditures that are planned for 2021?
No, I think you covered it. We do have some needs. They're not urgent, but there are, as time goes by, they will become so. Capital, if we budget an amount in, say, 2021 to address this issue, that means it's going to raise the dollars that you're going to have to send Region 4 to cover the deficit. It would seem more palatable to deal with it in excess funds so that you're not having to raise more tax dollars and come up with new money to address the issue. To me, it seems more palatable all the way around to use excess funds to deal with this issue.
Well, then it's good. I've got plenty of places to put excess funds, just to sort of offer an alternative to your choice, though. Board of Finance, any more questions? Board of Selectmen, any more thoughts?
I would like to chime in, Bud, if I can.
Sure, please.
Brian, what's the total deficit right now?
So Dick and I spoke about this. Dick, to answer Dwayne's question, can you kind of walk us through where we were with the total deficit at the end of 18-19, and now that the R4 board has voted to apply the $158,215, where we currently are?
Okay. The balance, the negative balance at the end of 18-19 was $429,279. At the May 14th meeting, the Board of Education moved $158,215 to be applied to the deficit, and another $25,319 to be applied to the deficit. We also, during the course of the year, you may remember, we closed off the capital projects when we learned there was a deficit, and we got a return from a partially done project of $6,738. The negative balance as of today is $239,007.
Okay, so I'm not here to bash people in the past, but if we take out that 360 or 345,000 that we bought for the fields, that's where this deficit all started from, basically, correct?
Well, they spent money they thought they had and they didn't.
Correct. So it was poor accounting and poor management back then. So I want to commend Brian and you, Richard, and the whole team of digging up all this problems that we've had. Bud and myself and Ricky sat on a couple of these task force. And again, I commend all your work. The problem is that you found so many mistakes that it hit us hard in Deep River this year. We had the ADM issue with the numbers that were miscalculated. But like you said in the beginning, we basically had, like Jane said also, we basically had a zero budget for Deep River this year. So again, I commend you for what you've done. I believe you guys all have a handle on where we're going next year. I support putting the money back in because we know where we're going now. We know what the deficit is. And I believe that the administration up at the school knows where they have a game plan moving forward. I don't believe, again, I'm not here to bash the past administration, but we never had a game plan. And I think the purchase of that property was a bad mistake. When it happened, thought it was a great deal, but it was a bad mistake. And we thought we had the money, or people thought they had the money and they didn't have the money. So again, we can't keep hashing over what had happened. We have to go forward and try to figure this out. And if every little bit helps to get you guys back on the right track, and so next year when you come to us, and hopefully you have a zero budget again for us next year, with not big increases, then it worked out. But maybe I'm just rambling on, but I just, those are my 2 cents.
Where did the 44,000 come from? You said it wasn't just surplus, it was from revenue. So where was that money? How was it earned? And what is the plan beyond this 44,014 from us? What's the plan for paying it back?
So I'll let Dick speak to the source of the revenues, and I can talk a little bit about some of the initial strategy moving forward and what I anticipate being able to recommend to my boards in the near future.
Well, we don't have very many sources of revenue. Two that come to mind are tuition from the preschool program, and we also have excess cost grant as a result of high cost special ed children. And those are the two primary areas that we see revenue. The preschool program generates very little, but the excess cost grant can, at times, depending on the students that are placed out, generate a considerable amount of money. Although over the years that is shrinking because the state is not increasing the funds in the budget line. But those are the two primary areas where the money comes from.
And then in terms of just the strategy moving forward, I mean, we recognize that even if we have the opportunity to apply the $43,065 that we're requesting from our three towns to the deficit, that there's still a remainder. Conversations I anticipate in the near future, we're going to be sharing out our end of year forecast for current fiscal year in the weeks ahead. Dick's been finalizing his projections. It's been a very uncertain time for us, as you know, with all of the COVID-19 factors, the fact that we've been essentially shut down since the 13th of March, but we've still had to honor a lot of contracts by way of executive order from the state. It's just been a very unusual end of year for us financially. With that being said, we're going to be sharing out end of year information very soon. There may be an opportunity at the end of this current fiscal year to apply some unexpended funds if the board chooses to do so. The other part of our strategy would be to, as we've discussed this evening, actually budget for this in next year's budget. We did something similar for 2021. We actually included a brand new budget line specifically to increase the insurance reserves and our self-insurance fund. The reason why I wasn't comfortable putting in a separate line in next year's budget for the purpose of paying down this deficit is because at the time of our budget development, we did not have audited numbers. And we knew that because of the overlap in the timeline between when the audit would occur and when the budget had to move through its different stages, that we weren't going to have what we felt to be credible numbers to present to the board. And so that was very uncomfortable for everything we were dealing with at the time. And quite frankly, the other factor was, as we've talked about, there were so many issues we were trying to tackle this year that we just had to be judicious in how much we tackled at once. And so we definitely see this as an opportunity this year to take a chunk out of that deficit. But moving forward, we're going to have to rely on the possibility of unexpended funds and budgeting some additional appropriated dollars through the budgeting process as the way that we would pay down this deficit over time. The fact that, hopefully we'll have that number under 200,000. I'm confident we should be able to essentially knock it out over a short period of time. But, my recommendation would be is as soon as you can eliminate the deficit, the better, just because it puts us in much better financial standing for future budgets and for just future work with our three towns.
Is there any plan at all going back to, what started all this, or, besides the accounting, to selling that property or a portion of that property? When you talk to taxpayers, at least the ones that I see, that is like one of the big elephants in the room is it shouldn't have been bought. And, full disclosure, some of the people in this call, I was on the R4 board at the time, and we were basically said that the money was there and we approved the purchase of the land. If the money wasn't there, then obviously we would not have done it. But it keeps coming up that, damn, they shouldn't have bought that piece of property. And it just seems to me that there should be some sort of a plan personally to sell it or part of it, and you could potentially wipe out that deficit. I mean, it was on the market for a long time when we bought it, and it might not be marketable now, but it would seem to me that it would be a good public relations thing to say, okay, we're disclosing all these errors that we made, and it probably shouldn't have been bought, and it's listed for sale.
Yeah, so Jim, that's an ongoing board conversation for sure. One of the things, as I mentioned, it was very difficult to put any new spending initiatives in this year's budget for the simple fact that we knew that we had to tackle a very low insurance reserve, which we knew was going to be problematic if we didn't take steps on that front. And then obviously we knew that we were going to have a significant deficit in capital that we'd be addressing. And so with those two factors in play, it made it very hard to put new money, so to speak, in the budget for different spending initiatives. One of the things that we have talked about as a board this year is really pursuing some outside support for bringing in a group that could come in and really evaluate the overall condition of our athletic fields and by extension, the Mislick property. I believe that's still something of interest to the board, and we're going to be talking about moving forward how that might be possible. I think it'll be important to do a full survey of all of our athletic fields for a variety of reasons. They're in need of repair, and so with the debt from the renovations on JW and Valley scheduled to roll off the books in a few years, I mean, those renovations were already 15 years ago. If there's an appetite for a small bond locally, now would be the time to start those conversations. And I think a field use study would be an important preliminary step towards informing the board about what's needed. And as I mentioned, the board would be interested in looking at Mislick as an extension of that work. I was told coming into district about a year ago that some of the rationale for looking to acquire that Mislick land would be potentially the expansion of athletic use. I understand that those conversations and that dialogue might not have been as public as people would certainly have preferred, and I understand that. But it's certainly something that I think the board should be well informed about in order to make decisions about how to best proceed. And so we will be taking those steps as soon as we're able to do so.
Isn't there property also on Falls Landing that the school district owns, Brian?
There is a piece of property on Fells Landing as well. It's not contiguous to the high school property. For those of you that are familiar with the lot, the Mislick property is actually adjacent to Valley property. The Fells Landing property that Dwayne mentions is actually across the street. So if you're coming up Kelsey Hill Road off of Route 80, that first street you see on your left is Falls Landing, and that corner lot is also owned by the district.
Ricky needs some new neighbors anyways.
Can I say something? I don't know if it's appropriate at this point, but basically, I think the board is committed to looking at all different things. I think we really need to pay down the deficit. And I didn't understand for the longest time how we could be functioning with this deficit. And the way they kind of explained it at this meeting was it's a cash flow issue. There's money coming in, so we just kind of keep paying our bills. And I guess sometimes it's a little tight, but we still do it. But if the district closed down on June 30th and there was no more money coming in, we would be not able to pay the bills of $200,000 because that cash flow wouldn't be coming. So we have to kind of pay this, and we've got to get it down. And there were mistakes made in the past, and I think there's a commitment from the administration and the board to look at everything. So, and I think these are conversations going forward. But now I think it's, do you put this money back in and try to bring the deficit down with money that's already been appropriated and is sitting there, or do we wait till next year? So I think that's obviously the Board of Finance's decision, but my thing is, it would really be helpful to do it now, and I think it really would show appreciation for all the work that has been going, and the fact we now have real numbers and that you have confidence that we're going forward. So, peace.
Board of Finance, any other comments, questions? Board of Finance, the Angus has asked us not to get emotional. So I'm going to say the following because I will become emotional quickly. $14,000 is not a big number. We did not anticipate this number. We cannot ask the regional board to cut their programs because that would harm students. We are eventually going to have to pay for this now or later, and it looks like we're going to get the ability to do both under certain conditions. Can I have a motion from someone on the Board of Finance that authorizes Angus and I to take whatever action is necessary to return to
Bud, stop. We can't take a motion until we hear from any other audience.
Okay.
Sorry. So
hang on one second. I was muted and was unable to get my computer to allow me to speak one more time.
Excellent. Okay. Does anyone else wish to speak? Then I will once again ask the Board of Finance for a motion.
Sorry.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was struggling there to get unmuted. Sorry. And Bill, it looked like you were trying to speak too, so I'm not sure if you were unmuted either. But I want to just go back touch on one thing that I heard. Everyone had great things to say, and I think we're all appreciative of the efforts of the Board of Finance or the Board of Education and Brian and Richard and that whole team. But a couple of analogies that came up in this conversation was family. We're borrowing from our brother, borrowing from ourselves, all this kind of thing. And I want to remind us, it doesn't always feel like it, but we are in fact all the same community. The Board of Education are elected officials, just like the Board of Finance are elected officials, just like the Board of Selectmen are elected officials from our community. We are all on the same team. We may have a little different focus here and there, but we are all the same family, and we need to continue to cooperate towards this. The Board of Education has made their decision that this is the best way forward. The Board of Selectmen has not officially made the decision, but I've heard from a couple folks that are, myself and Dwayne, that are agree that this is the best way forward. And I would ask the Board of Finance to remember that we are all in this together, and we are going to get through this repair to the accounting practices in the Outfit Region 4 together. That's all.
Again, Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen, there was a rumor that Bill was going to speak. Is Bill, did you say Bill was speaking, or is Bill talking?
Yeah, what I want to say is a gentleman made a statement that in the future, that if money becomes available, if the board elects to go this way, then that's what they will do, which tells me that nothing has really changed. They're going to go this way if they feel like it's going to go. If we give them the money now and say it's okay, they'll say, well, okay, we have this money now. We really don't need it, so we're all set. We can go on from there. I don't like what I'm hearing. I know you've worked hard. I know everyone has worked hard, and that's all I've heard. But the point is, I haven't heard this big commitment like, yes, we are going to solve this problem, period. And if we have to give up something to do it, we will do it. I have my own household here. If I have to do something and I have to give up something to do it, then I do that. But that doesn't seem to be the case here. It's like, we're not going to give anything up. We're just going to go ahead as we are and hope you guys continue to help us out. And yet, a few years ago, when the state said, no, we're not going to fund this, and we went to schools and say, look, they're not going to fund this. Can you guys give us a hand? They says, no, this is your problem, not ours. So why should we suddenly turn around and be the nice guys? And I'm not saying, and like Angus said, we're all family. But even in family, you've got to do the right thing. You got to do it physically and financially. And I don't see this happening at this point.
Thank you. Well said. Any other Board of Finance wish to make a comment?
Yes, I would. I don't know if it was Brian or Dick who mentioned that there might be unexpended funds at the end of the year that they would be able to put towards that deficit. So that leads me to think that there is in their budget someplace where there is money that's not necessarily going to be spent as directed, and they will come up with some money to help them fund their deficit. And as Bill said, in your own household, when you make a plan to do something, if you don't have enough money to do it, you cut something else out so you could make ends meet. We on the Board of Finance have worked really hard this year to keep our budget as low as we possibly could, to not burden our taxpayers. And we've eliminated things in our budget that we would perhaps have liked to put in there. We've said, no, we are not going to do that this year. Maybe we'll see what happens next year. Maybe we'll be able to do it next year. And I think that the regional board needs to relook at its budget and see if perhaps there are places where it can make adjustments so that it can cover a deficit. We can use that $14,000 in our budget.
Well said. Any remaining Board of Finance that wishes to comment? All right, since we have asked for grander comments, it is time once I return. I am looking for a motion from the Board of Finance, and soon a second, to return the 14,000, Laura, give me the number, 14,300?
$43,065.
Well, that's the total.
No, ours is $14,534.44.
I am looking for a motion. to allow Angus and I to initiate whatever needs to be done for accounting and public hearing, to return that to the regional board.
Bud, just a matter of how this is done. Is it a motion or is it a resolution to go to a town meeting to get this completely done? And I just want to make sure that we're clear on
No,
it.
I couldn't say, can I have okay, I would motion to make a resolution, but yes.
Okay.
I think that really what you're doing tonight is simply agreeing to move forward or to not move forward.
Correct.
The Board of Selectmen will call a special meeting. You will call a special meeting to move this forward. It was not on our agenda, which was an error on my part. So we can't, at this point, I can't justify putting it, adding it to our agenda now. But we can do this. We can do this so that it can happen in this fiscal year. It's just a matter of process. I think what you all are doing is agreeing to move forward as recommended by the Board of Education and me, or agreeing to not move forward.
Correct.
And then Bud and I can move forward on the procedure once we hear that decision.
Okay, so it's more of a resolution if I'm hearing
Yes.
you correctly.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Now, hold on a second. We voted for the entire town budget as the budgeting authority. Can we even have a town meeting that we can get a vote, or do we have to vote on it? Are we going to a town meeting just so that people can comment, and then we have a special meeting ourselves to say, okay, we do this or we don't do this?
No. We will have the same. We don't need to go to a town meeting. The Board of Selectmen will authorize the Board of Finance, the budget-making authority in town, to vote to do this or not. There's no need for public comments other than what we did for our budget was extraordinary across the state. A lot of towns just went through it and approved it. We wanted to give as much input as we could to the public. There's no need for that in this.
My analogy is it will be in the current budget year ending
Yes.
June 30. It will take on the same adjustments, the same method we did when we changed the capital funds for the assessor, and when we changed the special line item to give Ray his whatever it is we paid him. But it would be following those things. We changed this year's budget, and we would follow the same procedure. So we adjust the current budget.
That's my hope, is that we can do this in this fiscal year so that it does not impact at all next year's budget.
That would be the procedure that I would follow if I get a motion.
But no, I don't think we're taking a vote. It's almost a straw vote, just to say
It
we're
is
going
a
to.
straw vote, but without that straw vote, there's no sense us going to a public hearing.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Board of Finance, do I hear anyone who supports my my suggested motion that the 14 is marginal dollars? There are good people who made some mistakes along the way. They're asking for help, and shall we help them with the $14,000? Do I have a motion?
It sounds like a very heartfelt, boy, we're really nasty people if we say no, but I'm sorry, I'm saying no.
I appreciate your saying no. I interpret silence to be a no as well.
I would suggest that we simply let's do this on most of the Zoom meetings. Whenever there's a vote, we have not asked for voice votes. We've asked people to identify themselves and make their vote. And while this is not a vote, the Board of Selectmen is still in session, and I'm going to express once more that I am in support of making this payment now. I would ask Dwayne and then Jim to offer their voice, whether they are or not. And then I would ask each member of the Board of Finance to make the same.
I'm in support of it, Angus.
I'm in support of it.
All right, Laurie, do you wish to call the Board of Finance by name?
Yeah.
There's no resolution. How can you, what are you calling?
Well, we have to decide if we're going to go forward
To support the Resolution or not? Do we have a resolution on the floor?
I have
meeting.
offered a resolution that that Angus and I be authorized to execute whatever is necessary to return the $14,300 to the regional board. That's the
Okay.
and I cannot get anyone to give me a first or second, but Laurie's about to call the vote whether people support it.
I'm just putting it in here. Okay, Bill, you're
No.
not, no, I can't say anything.
Didn't want to take a lot of time doing this.
Yeah, we're done with that one. Okay, Carmella,
No.
Bud,
Yes.
John,
No.
Russ,
Nay.
me. 2 letters. I'm sorry. And Brian, I know you have been working diligently. I just still see areas in the fund that, in the school budget, that could be addressed a little bit tighter, such as the cafeteria fund. And we need the money right now some of us were not really counting on it, but counting on it so we could get a police officer. If we can't hire a police officer, that's going to hurt more than not having the money in the savings account. So I say no. So the Board of Finance did not pass the resolution on for Angus and Bud to move forward with us for the return. So we are expecting the return of fund, the 14,000 to the town.
Correct. All right. Unless
All right.
anyone has any concluding statements.
Yeah, I mean, I would just like to thanks for you all for the time this evening. I appreciate your consideration. I appreciate that these are difficult decisions, and I also appreciate the fact that there's a lot of competing factors when it comes to looking at how we're supporting all of our programs in areas of the 3 towns. So again, I appreciate your time this evening, and I thank you on behalf of the R4 board for your consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we do appreciate what you've been doing. There's a lot of work you stepped into. It is
I think there's been a
appreciated.
lot of really good progress. We're just in a hard place this year.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
We need an adjournment.
As do we.
I'll make
motion to adjourn.
Russ, okay. Second,
Second.
Dwayne, did I hear your voice?
Yeah, I'll make a motion, Angus.
Second.
Thank you. Favor?
Aye.
all in favor on our board?
Aye.
Although I enjoy our times together.
Thank you for your time tonight. It's great to see everyone.
Bye, everybody.
I'm